Right. So yeah, as I said, I've not seen this sort of question. I've not attempted this question previously myself. So we're just going to sort of take a quick look at it here. Now, I didn't include the picture because what I wanted to talk about was writing a narrative, writing a story, which a lot of people find significantly easier. The picture in question was like of a graveyard gate, if you're wondering. So we've got two choices here: either write a description of a mysterious place, rather, as suggested by this picture, or write a story about an event that cannot be explained. Now, when I start writing, okay, first things to bear in mind here is this is an exam. They're not expecting a fully finished, complete story, though obviously I will need to include this mystery element, because that's a crucial part of the story. Right, so yeah, I mean, it's an exam question. They're not expecting a full story here. You know, it's always going to be quality over quantity. However, the element here is this mystery, this thing that cannot be explained. So I will need to plan thinking I'm going to, you know, I need to get to this. So I need to introduce that fairly early on, really. Okay. Now, coming on from that, what I need, basically, I'm going to make myself a list of bullet points of things I need to think of to start with. So first off is I need a genre. So what am I writing? What style am I writing? Okay, what kind of story? And if I was writing any other story, you know, if I was writing this for leisure, I might sort of play around a bit. I might write something a bit different or something like that. But this is an exam. I don't necessarily have time for that. So I'm going to stick to detective fiction. Okay. So detective fiction is your sort of standard, you know, film noir sort of pulp fiction thing. So we can tell from that. So tropes. So I'm absolutely going to play on these tropes, these common conventions that we understand from detective fiction. So I need a main character. And they are going to be they're going to be a private detective. Now, we understand from this genre, if you've read detective fiction, if you've watched detective movies, that your detective character, they tend to be a bit of a rebel, maybe. They don't necessarily play by the rules. They might be a bit hard-bitten, you know, they're sort of quite jaded, quite cynical, clever for sure, but maybe a bit scruffy, a bit disorganized, that sort of thing. You know, they're not necessarily the star of the department or whatever. They are slightly playing by their own rules, but they get results. Maybe they sort of skirt that line a little bit, really. Because another trope of detective fiction is this sort of moral ambiguity, you know. Maybe someone does something bad, but for a good reason, you know, maybe the good guys are corrupt, you know, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. And of course, the other famous trope of detective fiction is this idea of the femme fatale, you know, the woman, usually a widow, usually an older woman who's sort of maybe got some secret, you know, maybe it's something to do with her husband who's long since gone or something like that. You know, there's something lurking in the sort of the weeds there, you know, there's mysteries to uncover, you know, the human story, drama, we want all that. So our secondary character, we're going to have the widow, and she's again, playing with these conventions here. She's going to come from the upper classes, you know, she's going to potentially have, you know, her husband's potentially going to be, oh, I don't know, he could be an industrialist, maybe he owns a chain of shops or something like that. And, you know, maybe he's had a bit of a murky past as well, because I think everyone in this story will have. Okay. So I've got my main character, my secondary character, I've got my genre, and I need a location. And we're going to have detective's office. Okay. Now, I'm also going to start thinking about atmosphere. Okay, so my atmosphere is it's going to be quite manky, for want of a better word. You know, the weather's going to be quite bad. Okay, so it's going to be run down, bad weather, grey and grimy. Okay, that's what I'm going for here. This is my atmosphere. I want things to be falling apart a bit at the seams, sagging. You know, I want it to be raining outside, maybe neon lights, that sort of thing. I'm very much trying to conjure up this atmosphere. So when I'm going through this, I'm going to stop at various points and I'm going to explain how I'm incorporating all these things. Right. One tip here, okay? Pathetic fallacy. When I'm creating the atmosphere, I'm going to really focus on describing the weather, surroundings, etc. in a rundown, less than pleasant and quite grey and grimy way, okay? And what this will do is it will feed back into my story. And even though, you know, I'm not explicitly telling the reader that this is, you know, quite run down, quite grey, quite grimy, they'll get the idea of that because that's how I'm describing the weather. That's how I'm describing this world. My entire world is run down. It is grey. It is grimy. There's that atmosphere running throughout it. Everything within that world is like that. In real life, that doesn't happen, of course. You know, in real life, these sorts of events, they can happen on a sunny June day, you know, but in fiction, the weather, the environment, it's all going to reflect what's going on in my story. And that's really going to help me create this picture. It's really going to help me describe this. Okay, so we've got all that. We've got our plan. So now we need to roughly know what's going to be happening. Okay, so opening. I'm going to go with intro detective's office. Okay. I'm going to have the widow walks in. So moving on. Introduction of the characters. I'm going to have the detective sort of basically detective's internal monologue here and regarding the widow. And this is going to do two things. My internal monologue, so my detective talking to himself here. Firstly, it's going to introduce him a bit. It's going to tell us a bit about his character. So he's going to be dealing with this in quite a cynical, sort of hard-bitten way. But it's also going to sort of set the scene a bit and potentially sort of, sort of help develop these characters, help develop the setting just that little bit more. So right from the start, I'm making sure with my plan that I'm not including anything that isn't needed. Okay. And then finally, we're going to have, because I'm only going to be focusing on the first three parts here, really. And then finally, we're going to have this reveal. So the mystery is unveiled. Okay. And I think the mystery is going to have something to do with the widow's, late husband at the moment. It seems like that's going to make the most sense with my story. I might change my mind as I go on. Now, some people plan in great detail. I don't tend to. I tend to plan very much just like this, really, because I like to leave it quite open. Other people, if you're one of those people where actually you kind of need to know where you're going, obviously spend a bit more time planning. That's fine. So I want to start then. Okay, so I'm going to start here. And we'll start with that. But the trouble here is it's not exactly grasping anybody, really, is it? I'm telling the reader here that it's a cold and windy day. So I'm going to go back and edit. Okay. So first off, I want to remember, okay, remember to do these different things. So engaging all the senses, range of language features. And I also want to show, not tell. So instead of it was a cold, windy day. I'm going to expand out on that. So what elements of this cold and the wind can I sort of really focus on here? Okay. So I'm going to start with Can you right? So that there, obviously, what I'm doing is I'm drawing on different senses here. So I'm drawing on the sensation of cold, of touch, and stuff like that. Really, the thick fog of the early morning hadn't quite cleared, so I'm setting a time here without telling you it's in the day. You can infer that because, well, it's not going to be early morning, but it might be late morning, might be about 10, 11-ish. It hung about lampposts and rusted shutters of long closed shops. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting the scene a bit without telling you this is taking place in a street, without telling you that this is taking place in a city. You've got the lampposts, you've got the shops, and the rusted shutters of long closed shops is telling us that this place here, this location, this neighborhood is probably quite run down. And I'm using a nice simile here. I'm saying like a mugger with a flick knife, the biting cold ready to ambush the unwary and cut through to the bone. So what I'm doing with this simile here is I'm specifically choosing this simile because I want to get across this idea that this is not a nice neighborhood. This isn't a place where you necessarily want to be out at night, really, you know? So I'm comparing the weather itself to a mugger. So I'm highlighting the fact this might be a dangerous neighborhood, but I'm also reinforcing the idea that the weather itself is quite unpleasant as well. And I'm just going to finish that up really with a bit of a sort of auditory thing here. The neon sign advertising late night pizza delivery hissed and crackled in the grey November gloom. So that's going to work a lot better than just saying it was a cold, windy, rainy day. So moving on, I have started to introduce the setting here. So now I'm going to start to introduce the detective's office. Too much. I was about to say there, I was about to put the damp had swollen the termite infested wood, and I thought, no, that's a bit too much. I'm laying it on a bit thick here. I don't need to go overboard. So there we go. So instead of just saying she walked into the office, I'm saying the door to my office squeaked slightly as and caught as the person behind it grunted slightly with effort, dislodging it from the frame where the damp had swollen the old wood. And here you can see here, I'm still going back and I'm reading it to myself and I'm thinking, I've repeated slightly there. So you know what? I'm going to lose that bit. I'm going to lose that first slightly. It's not needed as much. Um, can't come up with a good name at the moment, so I'm going to leave that blank. So the golden embossed letters advertising my services as a private investigator, shadowing her. So again, I'm introducing her a bit here, really. And of course, the sort of golden embossed letters, I'm introducing the sort of character as well. You know, the main character, the private investigator, has been introduced here. We know he's a private investigator. We know that he's working out of a rundown office. We know that there's a woman sort of coming in. Plus, you know, why else would she be here unless she wanted to hire an investigator? And that sort of shadowing bit also sort of potentially foreshadows that it could be something maybe a bit dangerous here, maybe some sort of element of danger, of mystery, of suspense, of crime. Okay. So moving on from this, so I've probably sort of done this first bit here where I'm introducing a detective's office. So what I'd then do is I would move on to that internal monologue. And after I've done that, I think I'll stop because we've gone through enough, I think. But hopefully you can see here where I'm sort of building this in. I'm starting to think about the characters. I'm starting to think about what's going to be happening here. And I'm constantly going back and I'm editing. I'm thinking about what I could be doing differently. So this wouldn't necessarily be the final product. In the exam, they absolutely do not mind crossings out, notes, you know, little asterisks, arrows pointing to where you'd stick a paragraph. That's absolutely fine. They're not expecting something really polished and fine-tuned. Okay. So now for the internal monologue bit here. Right. So let's have a bit of a look here, because again, as I said, I'm not going to include anything in this. And in fact, I'm probably going to go back at some point. I'm going to delete a bunch of stuff that I don't think is needed. I'm not including anything in this that isn't vital for moving the story forward, right? So if we have a bit of a look at this, what I'm doing here is with this internal monologue here, which is this sort of little paragraph here, is I'm doing a couple of things. Firstly, I'm introducing this widow, okay? And I'm also starting to sort of introduce these elements that are really common tropes with detective fiction and stuff like that. So you've got this idea that there may be something murky in the background here. So I'm talking here about, you know, it might be the husband went missing after he crossed some important mobster in the city, you know. But I'm also sort of getting across this idea of tragedy, which often occurs in these detective fiction sort of, this genre, And I'm also at the same time getting across maybe there's a possibility that she might have had something to do with it. We don't know, do we? And that's absolutely something we're going to be discovering as we go on. There's going to be a lot more of these characters than meets the eye. There always is with this genre. Now, I'm also letting you know that this detective, this main character, this is someone who knows what's going on in their city. They're aware of what's going on in their city. They're obviously connected enough to hear about these people, to know about this sort of murky, seedy criminal underworld, and at the same time know about the sort of, so to speak, royalty, so the ultra rich in this city, and I think we can sort of like expand on this a little bit more. I've got that little still there at the end, so maybe the characters themselves is doubting this, and we can just go. And here I want to sort of show off this main character's skills as a detective. So I'm just so mink stole is a sort of like scarf thing made out of really fancy fur. And I think actually, you know what? That last sentence there, I'm going to delete. And again, this is the editing process as I'm sort of going back, because I think I'm telling rather than showing a bit too much there. So yeah, there we go. Got a little bit of a monologue there, so we can see that the character is a detective. They're thinking about this character, and that's doing a couple of things here. So I'm introducing the character, but I'm also sort of showing off the fact that the detective knows what they're doing, really. Okay, and I just want to introduce one more thematic element here. So I want you to imagine that I've gone through this, I've gone through the surprise and everything like that. And we'll just end with the detective leaving the office. Because I want to introduce an important thematic element here, an important structural element in any story, which really highlights what I've been getting across today in terms of no spare space. Everything needs to be doing something. So I've just had the character as they're about to leave. They go back to their desk. They pick up the gun and they sort of buckle it on. Right. Okay. So a couple of things to mention here. Firstly, what I'm doing here is I'm amping up the tension because we now know that the character believes that there may be something out there he might need to defend himself. And secondly, I am doing something here, and there's a rule in storytelling called Chekhov's gun. Chekhov is a Russian playwright, and he famously said that if in scene one you tell us there is a rifle hanging on the door, hanging behind the door, that rifle needs to be used by the end of the play. And what that basically means is don't focus on something like this. Don't focus on something important like this, or apparently important like this, without using it later on. So as I'm writing this, right, that gun is going to come in some use. It's going to be important in some way, shape, or form. Okay. So again, final bit there. But as you can see, what I've done here is I've gone through. I started from my plan here. I started thinking about what kind of story I was going to be writing. And again, as I said, in the exam is probably not the best time to start thinking about you really experimenting. So I just went with, well, it's a mystery, you know, it's an event, so I'm going to write detective fiction, so I can play on those tropes there. So understanding the tropes is important, you know. So in this case, detective fiction, well, I'm going to have a main character who's a grizzled, hard-bitten private detective. Secondary character, location, the office, really. And again, finally, I was thinking about atmosphere and how I want to create that atmosphere and the importance of pathetic fallacy. So the environment, the way I describe the weather, the way I describe the people, all of this is reinforcing this idea, this overall atmosphere I'm going for of somewhere that's quite grimy, quite run down, just a bit sort of murky, maybe stuff that's hidden. Okay, and then I had my plan. So I went through 3 different bits here. And to be honest, I would say in the exam, that's all you're going to get done. Keep it simple. You know, you don't want to introduce a ton of characters. I've remembered to engage all the senses, and I've written this down, and you absolutely can when you do the exam as well. You know, write these little bullet points down to help you out. So I started off with a description, and I used pathetic fallacy here. I went back to edit to add some extra stuff. So I'm sort of describing the fog. I'm using some similes that will hopefully get across the idea that this place is quite run down. And then we sort of moved through, and my actions moving as I go. You know, each paragraph is introducing something, but also each paragraph is trying to move that story on a bit. So we introduced the secondary character here, really. We've not really introduced the primary character yet. And then we get this nice little monologue. And monologues can be useful because they can sort of tell us a lot about the character, but also the way the character thinks about things. So this is somebody who's quite cynical, who's quite in touch with the city that they're working in, who knows what's going on, basically. And then we sort of continue with that, and we get a little bit of a sort of show off there of their skills and that, but also introducing more story elements. And then finally, we finish with a bit of that, quite literally, this case, Chekhov's gun. So there we go. That is, broadly speaking, how I'd approach this, my personal creative approach, my process sort of thing. Yours is absolutely going to differ, of course, but hopefully you'll get some useful stuff out of this. Okay.